The base in Lumen slides under your skin like anesthetic. I watched from the shadows as a kid, with a ring light blinded guests in the diamond room. I approached. "This is a VP area, get out!" The influencer yelled at me in the club. I signaled the bouncer. He grabbed the influencer. "Hey! Unhand me! Do you know who I am?" The bouncer looked at me. "Boss, do you want him banned for life?" I nodded. "For life." Jackson dragged him out before the feed cut. That kid was just a glitch. He thought he was paying for bottle service. But he was actually paying for my obsession with control. I don't stand in the spotlight. I stand behind the tinted glass of my office. Watching the ecosystem I built eat money and spit out dopamine. Lumen isn't about noise. It is about the things you do in the dark. We sell invisibility to people who have too much to lose. If you come here to scream for attention, you are trespassing. It was nearly midnight on a Friday. The floor was a swaying ocean of linen suits, silk dresses, and enough filler injections to float a battleship. I leaned against the back bar of the invitation. Only sector, sipping club soda. My eyes scanned the room, checking the flow. The waitresses moved with synchronized grace, drilling through the crowd like expensive machinery. Everything was perfect. Everything was a well-oiled machine of luxury and vice. Then I saw the real problem, resting his boots on my imported Italian leather. The boy I just banned was a nobody, a tourist in my world. The man in booth 4 was different. Chase Reynolds sat on the prime real estate next to the balcony rail. That booth is reserved for people who own islands or record labels. Not for influencers whose income is their father's trust fund. But there he was, acting like a king. He looked like a parody of Miami Vice. Wearing sunglasses indoors and screaming at a server. He was holding a phone, ready to broadcast. My head of security, Jackson, crackled in my earpiece. His voice was tight with restrained violence. He asked if I wanted Chase bounced too. Every instinct in my body screamed yes. I wanted him dragged out by his Gucci loafers and thrown into the alley with the trash. But I couldn't do it. Chase was a legacy admission. His father, Thomas, had paid for the walls that Chase was currently disrespecting. I touched the small scar on my hand, and told Jackson to stand down. "Let him stay," I whispered, though the words tasted like ash. Jackson didn't argue, but I felt his disapproval radiate through the comms. Chase was pouring vodka onto the velvet upholstery, laughing at his screen. He thought he was untouchable because of his last name. He thought he was the main character in this story. He had no idea I was already calculating the structural integrity of his social life. Dealing with a stranger was easy. Dealing with family would require a much sharper blade. Chase Reynolds didn't just walk into a room, he infected it. He arrived with a standard entourage of parasites that looked like they sold crypto out of a Honda Civic. 3 girls with bored eyes and 2 guys in shirts that cost more than my first car trailed him, like ducklings. They moved through the crowd with an unearned confidence that made my teeth ache. Chase was loud, tacky, and everything Lumen stood against. He was selling volume in a church of silence. To understand why I didn't have Jackson toss him into the street, you have to understand Miami 10 years ago. It wasn't this influencer hellscape yet. It was grittier, harder, and desperate. I was 35, tired, and sitting on a business plan every bank had rejected. I was a nobody managing a dive bar when Thomas Reynolds walked in. He didn't wear labels. He wore bespoke suits that whispered money instead of screaming it. He ordered a Scotch neat and listened. Thomas smoked a cigar that cost more than my rent while I pitched him. You want to sell silence? He asked, his voice a dry rasp. In a city that loves to scream. I nodded, terrified but certain. The loudest people have the most to hide, I told him. I want to give them a place to hide it in luxury. He chuckled, a sound like dry leaves crunched underfoot. He wrote the check right there on a wet cocktail napkin. There were no predatory interest rates or demands for majority equity. Just a handshake and a single request that would haunt me for a decade. Build something beautiful, Ashley, he said, looking me in the eye. And look out for my boy if I am not around. That was the hook. That was the ghost standing over my shoulder tonight. Chase was 16 then. Awkward and desperate for approval. Now he was 26, armed with an inheritance and 0 cents. The memory dissolved as I watched the monitor. Chase was currently snapping his fingers at one of my best waitresses. He treated the staff like furniture, bypassing lines and demanding comped bottles like it was his birthright. Every time he walked in, the atmosphere shifted from curated mystery to frat party chaos. Jackson stood beside me in the darkened office, his arms crossed over his chest. He is bad for the brand, boss, he rumbled. He is poison. I know, I said, my voice low. But the debt isn't paid yet. I watched Chase grab a passing server by the arm to pull her into a selfie. She flinched but forced a smile. My knuckles turned white, gripping the edge of my desk. I had promised Thomas I would guide his son, not enable a monster. But grief hadn't humbled Chase. It had emboldened him. He wasn't grieving a father, he was celebrating an unlimited credit line. Then, the audio feed picked up his voice over the deep house track. He was leaning toward a group of potential investors I recognized. Yeah. Lumen basically runs itself, Chase said, swirling his drink. I advise Ashley on the creative direction, you know she's great. But she's got that boomer energy. I am the one bringing the heat. I am practically a silent partner. I froze. The debt to Thomas was a shield. But Chase had just hammered it until it cracked. The vibration of my phone on the mahogany desk sounded like a drill. It was 1:15 a.m. The witching hour for bad decisions. The message came from a contact sitting in the gold room. It wasn't text, it was a screen recording. I opened it to see an Instagram live from Chase's account. The angle was shaky, zooming past a bottle of sparklers directly into the dimly lit corner where VIP 7 was holding hands with a woman who was definitely not his wife. My blood ran cold as I watched the view count tick upward. This wasn't just a violation of our privacy policy. It was a breach of contract that could bankrupt us. If a celebrity got outed in my house, the silence I sold would be worthless. Every high roller in Miami would vanish overnight. I didn't call Jackson this time. I stood up, smoothing the front of my silk blazer, and walked out of the office. I moved fast, skipping the main stairs. I found Jackson near the entrance of the diamond room. He saw my face and straightened up immediately. He knew that look meant damage control. Code red? He asked, leaning in to hear me over the bass. Worse, I said. Chase is broadcasting VIP -7. Get the signal jammer on that specific sector now. We had localized signal dampeners installed in the walls. They were technically a gray area legally, but in the nightlife world, they were essential for survival. I watched the feed on my own phone freeze. In the gold room, Chase frowned at his screen. He tapped it aggressively, then held it in the air, searching for the signal we had just strangled. Don't toss him yet, I told Jackson. If he leaves now, he uploads the video on the street. We need that phone. I pointed toward the service elevator. Invite him to the vault. Tell him I want to discuss a partnership. Stroke his ego until he chokes. The vault is a private tasting room in the basement. Soundproof and terrifyingly quiet. Jackson approached Chase with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I watched from the shadows as Chase's demeanor shifted from annoyance to smug satisfaction. He nodded, high-fived his crypto bros, and stood up. He thought he was being summoned to the throne room. He didn't know he was walking into a cage. He followed Jackson to the elevator, adjusting his unbuttoned shirt like a peacock. I watched the feed from my desk. Jackson placed Chase's phone in a Faraday bag on the table, claiming it was standard protocol for high-level strategy sessions. Chase didn't blink. He was too busy talking about his vision. While Jackson fed him lines about a Lumen ambassador program, my tech specialist entered as a waiter. He took the bag to tag it for security. In the back room, he was already scrubbing the metadata and wiping the recent video files. 10 minutes later, the waiter returned the phone. Chase didn't even check it. He shook Jackson's hand and left the room, looking like he had just conquered Rome. He went back upstairs to the party, oblivious to the legal bullet he had just dodged. I sat in the dark office, watching him on the monitor. I had saved the night, but the dynamic had shifted. Chase was no longer just a nuisance to be managed. He was a predator hunting my guests. Sunlight hit the dust motes in my office, but the mood was pitch black. I sat across from Saul, my lawyer who charged by the minute, and hated small talk. We were looking at a physical file that smelled like old money and regret. The morality clause is a nuclear option, Ashley. Saul rumbled, tapping the paper. You need proof of gross negligence or reputational damage. I looked at the screen where Chase was currently reposting his partnership delusions. I am not just going to ban him, I said. I am going to let him hang himself. Jackson walked in without knocking, his face grim. He placed a tablet on the desk. He's not just annoying, boss. He's poaching. On the screen was a leaked email chain. Chase was contacting our top alcohol vendors, using a Lumen partner email alias. He was leveraging my reputation to secure stock for his own venture. Cloud 9. I swiped through the pitch deck. It was full of stolen metrics. He wasn't building a club. He was trying to hollow mine out from the inside. I checked the calendar. Next Friday was the Eclipse event, our quarterly rebrand party. It was the most exclusive night of the season, designed to be a fortress of silence. I pulled a fresh notepad toward me. At the top, I wrote, Operation Blacklist. Underneath, I listed 3 steps. The invitation, the audience, and the execution. I wasn't going to kick him out with a simple text. I was going to make sure that by the time he left, he didn't have a name to drop anymore. The guest list was curated with surgical precision. 200 people, physical invitations only. Heavy black cardstock. I sent invites to the mayor and to Marcus Sterling. Sterling owns a venture capital firm that funds half the luxury hospitality sector. I knew Chase had been pitching him because he bragged about it at the bar. I invited Sterling to the owner's box. I did not invite Chase. Silence was my first weapon. I wanted him to feel the cold draft of exclusion. By Tuesday, the text started coming in. Hey, Auntie Ash. Didn't get my invite for Friday yet. Then, Ashley, my boys are asking about the table. Let me know which booth we got. I didn't reply. I let the silence marinate. By Thursday, he was frantic. He was posting stories. Big things coming Friday at Lumen. The king returns. He was lying to his audience. He was betting on the fact that he could just bully his way past the door. Then came the final nail. Another DM popped up. I am coming with a crew. Don't embarrass me, Ashley. My dad wouldn't like it. He was using Thomas to threaten me again. That was it. I typed a reply for the first time all week. See you tonight, Chase. Dress code is strict. It was ambiguous. It was a trap. He replied instantly with a fire emoji. He didn't know I had instructed the door staff to flag his attire, no matter what he wore. I wanted him agitated. I wanted him sweating before he even stepped foot inside. An angry man makes mistakes, and tonight I needed a catastrophe. I walked over to the window, looking out at the city, where the humidity was thick with impending rain. Chase thought he was a partner. Tonight, we would show him he was just a liability. I checked the RSVP list one last time. Marcus Sterling had confirmed. The trap was set. I just had to wait for the mouse. The club looked tired in the daylight. Velvet drapes sagging under the weight of last night's sins. I stood with Jackson and the security team on the empty dance floor. Here are the rules of engagement, I said, projecting the floor plan. The phone ban is absolute. Yonder pouches for everyone. No exceptions. Jackson raised a hand. What about Chase? He's not on the list. Do we stop him? I shook my head. If stopped, he plays the victim outside. The team looked confused, so I clarified the cruelty. We let him in, I repeated. But we treat him like a ghost. No table. No comped bottles. No special handshake. I walked to the bar, running a finger along the brass rail. He pays cover. He stands at the bar. We let him think he's winning until the moment he isn't. Jackson smirked. We weren't just bouncing him. We were starving him of the oxygen he desperately needed to survive. I clicked the remote, bringing up a photo of Marcus Sterling. This man is the target, I told the room. He will be in the owner's box with me. I saw the recognition in their eyes. They knew Chase had been stalking Sterling for funding. When Chase sees him, he will try to approach. Do we intercept? A bouncer asked. Only when he crosses the line, I said. I want the money to see the clown in his natural habitat. I dismissed the team and checked my phone. Another DM from Chase popped up. Dad wouldn't like you treating me like this. Fix it. That was the final nail. For years, I had let the memory of Thomas Reynolds dictate my business decisions. I had let a dead man's request hold me hostage. But Thomas asked me to look out for his boy, not let him burn down the castle. I deleted the message. The debt was paid. The ghost was exorcised. By 10 p.m. the transformation was complete. The theme for Eclipse was Midnight Garden. We draped the ceiling in cascading wisteria, and installed scent diffusers that smelled of jasmine and expensive gin. The lighting was low, deep purples and blues, making everyone's skin look flawless. It wasn't a club, it was a film set. I stood in the owner's box, checking the sightlines. From here, the floor was a petri dish, and I was the scientist watching the virus arrive. Marcus Sterling arrived via the private elevator. He was a man of sharp angles and few words, wearing a suit that cost more than an average mortgage. I poured him a glass of Krug. Impressive room, Ashley, he said, watching the empty floor. Controlled. I like controlled. I nodded, taking the seat opposite him. Chaos is bad for business, Marcus. You can't monetize a mess. He didn't know I was serving him a chaotic mess on a silver platter. I have a small variable tonight, I said, sliding a tablet toward him. A stress test. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The Reynolds kid. He thinks he's a partner, I explained. I want you to see exactly who you'd be in business with if you funded him. I tapped a control panel hidden under the table. The audio from the floor suddenly fed into the box, crystal clear. I've tuned the directional mics, I whispered. We will hear every word he says. Rain slicked the cobblestones, turning the alley into a black mirror. Kyle leaned against the brickwork, his breath hitching as fire radiated from his left shoulder. The bandage was already soaked through, heavy and warm against his skin. He checked the time on his cracked watch face, squinting through the downpour. He was 3 minutes late. In this business, 3 minutes was a lifetime, and usually a short one. He pushed off the wall, forcing his legs to move. A shadow detached itself from the far corner. He froze, hand drifting to the pistol tucked in his waistband. The figure didn't move like a local drunk. The posture was too rigid, too alert. Kale hugged the shadows, sliding his boots silently over the wet pavement. He needed to cross the intersection, to reach the basement entrance of the foundry. But the stranger stood directly in his path. The rain drummed a chaotic rhythm against the dumpsters, masking the sound of Kale clicking the safety off. He couldn't afford a gunfight here. Not this close to the drop. Kale grabbed a discarded glass bottle from the gutter. He tossed it high, aiming for a metal fire escape on the opposite side of the street. The glass shattered against the iron with a sharp clang that cut through the storm. The guard turned instantly, weapon raised toward the noise. Kale lunged. He covered the distance in 3 strides, his knife drawn. He didn't go for the kill, just the silence. He slammed the hilt into the man's temple, catching the falling body before it hit the ground. He dragged the unconscious man behind a stack of rotting pallets. A quick search revealed a standard issue radio and a badge he didn't recognize. This wasn't local law enforcement, it was private security, likely contracted by the firm. Kyle cursed under his breath. They knew he was coming. He left the guard and sprinted across the street, slipping through the rusted iron door of the foundry. The air inside was stale, smelling of rust and old oil. Darkness swallowed him whole as the heavy door clicked shut. His shoulder throbbed in sync with his heartbeat, a dull ache turning into sharp stabs. He needed to cauterize it soon, or infection would finish what the bullet started. He pulled a small flashlight from his pocket, shielding the beam with his fingers. The narrow corridor was empty, lined with pipes that hissed steam like dying snakes. He followed the markings on the floor, red arrows pointing toward the maintenance bay. Every creak of the building sounded like a footstep. Paranoia was a useful survival trait. He reached the heavy blast doors at the end of the hall. He knocked twice, waited a beat, then knocked once more. The latch spun with a groan of protesting metal. The door swung inward, revealing a dimly lit room filled with servers and monitors. Sia sat at the center, her face illuminated by the blue glow of the screens. She didn't look up as he entered. That was wrong. Sia always checked the door. Kale stopped, his hand tightening on the grip of his pistol. "Close the door, Kyle," she said, her voice flat and devoid of warmth. He did as he was told but didn't holster his weapon. He stepped closer, scanning the room for threats. There were no other shadows, no hidden corners. Just the hum of the cooling fans and the drip of condensation. "I have the drive," he said, pulling the bloody packet from his jacket. He placed it on the desk. Sia finally looked at him. Her eyes were red, rimmed and absolutely terrified. "I can't take it," she whispered. Kale frowned, confusion warring with adrenaline. This was the deal. "I bring the data, you clear my name." Sia shook her head slowly, a tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. She typed a command into the terminal, and a new window popped up on the main screen. It was a live feed of an apartment complex. Kyle's blood ran cold. It was his sister's building. A laser dot danced on her living room window. They have a sniper in position. Sia choked out. If I touch that drive, they fire. If you leave with it, they fire. Kale stared at the screen, the image searing into his retinas. The drive on the desk suddenly looked less like a bargaining chip, and more like a bomb. He looked at Sia, seeing the gun taped under the desk near her hand. She wasn't just a hostage, she was the trap. He realized the guard outside hadn't been patrolling. He was waiting. Who is listening? Kale asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sia tapped her earpiece. Kyle nodded, understanding the unspoken mechanics of the standoff. He slowly reached for the drive, his eyes locking with hers. He needed her to trust him one last time. He grabbed the drive and the pistol simultaneously. As he raised the gun, the power cut. The room plunged into absolute blackness. Then, the red emergency lights bathed them in blood, and the blast door began to hiss open. The red emergency strobe turned the room into a stuttering nightmare. Kale didn't hesitate, tackling Sia off her chair, just as sparks showered the desk where her head had been. Bullets chewed through the monitors, glass exploding in slow motion under the strobe effect. The blast door wasn't opening for a guest, it was opening for a firing squad. He dragged Sia behind a heavy server rack, the metal cooling fins digging into his spine. Stay down, he hissed, shoving the cold drive deep into his inner pocket. They were trapped like rats in a neon cage. Heavy boots crunched on the broken glass near the entrance. Kale counted 3 distinct sets of footsteps, maybe 4. His left shoulder screamed in protest, the earlier wound tearing open with every shift of his weight. Blood made his grip on the pistol slippery. He wiped his palm on his pants, eyes darting to the rows of servers. The hum of the machines was replaced by the mechanical click of tactical lights sweeping the gloom. They were professional, silent, and methodically clearing the room. He had 6 rounds left. Sia gripped his arm, her nails digging into his jacket. The sniper, she gasped, her eyes wide and reflecting the pulsing red light. If we go offline, he shoots. Kale looked at the severed power cables sparking near the ceiling. We already are offline, he whispered back. That feed was cut the second the lights died. Sia froze, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. The leverage was gone. But so was the safety net. Now it was just a slaughter. He saw resolve harden her features. The lead tactical light swept over their cover, blinding Kale for a split second. He didn't return fire. Instead, he aimed at the overhead pressure valve he had noticed earlier. It was a desperate gamble, but physics was the only ally he had left. He squeezed the trigger twice. The shots rang out, followed immediately by a deafening hiss. Superheated steam blasted downward, creating a scalding white curtain between them and the gunmen. Screams of surprise and pain echoed through the sudden fog. The chaos was their only exit ticket. Move! Kale roared, shoving Sia toward the rear maintenance hatch. The steam was blinding, burning his exposed skin and filling his lungs with metallic heat. They scrambled over tangled cables and debris, the red light diffusing into a bloody fog. Gunfire erupted blindly behind them, rounds pinging off the metal racks. Kale fired one shot back into the white void to keep heads down. He reached the hatch, spinning the wheel with his good arm. It was rusted shut. He gritted his teeth, forcing his injured shoulder to help. The wheel screeched, Metal grinding against metal, refusing to budge. A bullet struck the wall inches from his face, spraying concrete dust into his eyes. Adrenaline surged, momentarily dulling the agony in his torn shoulder. With a primal grunt, he threw his entire body weight against the lever. The seal broke with a pressurized pop. He kicked the door open, revealing a dark, narrow crawl space filled with conduit. "Go," he commanded, practically throwing Sia inside. She scrambled in, her breathing ragged and loud in the confined space. Kyle squeezed in after her, pulling the hatch shut just as a heavy body slammed against the other side. He jammed the wheel with the barrel of his empty gun, locking it temporarily. They were in the guts of the foundry now. The air here was cool and smelled of damp earth. "Where does this go?" he asked, his voice echoing in the tunnel. Sia checked her wrist computer, the screen cracked but functional. "Storm drains," she panted. "It dumps out down near the harbor. We have to hurry." They crawled for what felt like miles, knees scraping against rough concrete. Kyle's vision blurred at the edges, blood loss finally demanding its due. He focused on the soles of Sia's boots, using them as a beacon in the gloom. He couldn't protect his sister if he bled out in a sewer. "Sia?" he croaked, needing to know. The sniper. Did he have a confirm code? Sia didn't stop moving. "Yes, every hour." On the hour, Kale checked his watch. They only had 14 minutes left. The tunnel widened, ending in a rusted grate that looked out over the oily black water of the harbor. Rain lashed against the bars, washing away the sewer stench. Kyle kicked the grate, the corroded bolts giving way easily. They tumbled out onto a slippery concrete embankment, the city skyline looming above like a jagged set of teeth. The cold rain felt like a blessing on his feverish skin. He helped Sia up, scanning the waterline for a boat or a path. But the docks were strangely empty. A vibration buzzed against his chest. It wasn't his phone. He had smashed that hours ago. It was the burner phone he had swiped from the unconscious guard outside. He stared at the device as it lit up the rainy dark. The caller ID was just a single, mocking emoji, a smiley face. He answered, putting it on speaker. "Good run, Kyle." A synthesized voice purred. "But check your other pocket. You dropped something back there." Kale patted his jacket. The hard drive was gone. Kyle frantically ripped the lining of his jacket, fingers scraping against wet wool. Nothing but lint, and the cold dampness of the rain greeted him. The realization hit him harder than the bullet in his shoulder. The earlier scuffle in the alley hadn't been a victory. The guard's fall was a feint. While Kale had been dragging him to the pallets, the operative had sliced the pocket with a razor, precision cut. He had been played from the very start. The synthesized laughter from the phone cut through the storm's roar. "You have 12 minutes before the hour." The voice crackled, distorting into a digital growl. "Your sister is watching television. She looks peaceful." Kale gripped the phone until the plastic casing creaked, his knuckles turning white. "What do you want?" he snarled, watching Sia shivering against the concrete wall. "Simple trade," the voice replied. "You have the decryption key. We have the drive. Bring me the girl, and I call off the dog." The line went dead before Kale could bargain. Kale stared at the dark screen, rain dripping from his nose onto the glass. Sia stepped closer, hugging her arms to her chest, her teeth chattering audibly. "Kale, do we have it?" she asked, her voice trembling. He looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time that night, the decryption key wasn't a password on a sticky note. It was biometric. It was her retinas, her prints. She wasn't just the hacker, she was the vault itself. "We need to move," Cale said, shoving the phone into his pocket. He didn't answer her question. And the fear in her eyes deepened. He grabbed her arm, perhaps a little too roughly, and pulled her toward a row of rusted shipping containers. A lone delivery truck sat idling near the loading crane, its headlights cutting cones of yellow mist through the gloom. The driver was nowhere to be seen. Likely taking a smoke break out of the rain. It was their only chance. They sprinted across the slick pavement. Footsteps slapping loudly against the wet concrete. Kyle's vision swam, black spots dancing in his periphery, as the blood loss sapped his strength. He stumbled, falling hard against the truck's grill. Sia caught him, her small hands gripping his jacket with surprising force. "Get in," she ordered. Yanking the driver's side door open. The cab smelled of stale tobacco and cheap coffee. Cale hauled himself into the seat, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side. He twisted the ignition key, the engine roaring to life with a shudder. Kyle jammed the gear stick into drive, tires spinning on the slick oil before catching traction. As they sped toward the exit gate, he hit the central lock button. The distinct thud of the deadbolts engaging echoed in the cab. Sia looked at him, panic finally overtaking her exhaustion. "Cale. The safe house is north," she whispered. Kyle didn't look at her. "We aren't going to the safe house. We're going to the only person left with enough gravity to stop this. Thomas Reynolds."